اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا. I guess no matter what we do, the cultural effect of the 27th night will continue to live on. I don't necessarily oppose it. I oppose it being the only night that you put in effort or you spend time in salah and ibadah, because I think that's wrong. I think you're missing the point of the teaching that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left us with, and what the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam also left us with. But I mean, I grew up in Sham, and the 27th night always had a certain allure that exceeded what other nights had, and I continue to find it from a cultural perspective and a personal perspective a little bit of attachment towards it, and I don't mind it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the blessing of this night, inshallah ta'ala. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu was very firm on this was the night, and a number of other Sahaba would make that statement openly. The Quranic theme that I've chosen for tonight is a code of conduct. This is a powerful part of what the Quran teaches us. The Quran is very interested in making sure that we have a proper set of ethics and morals that we adhere to in our lives. And that code of conduct is what we are going to be held to Yawm al-Qiyamah as well. And often the Quran will show us the code of conduct of the Prophet ﷺ specifically, because he was held to a different standard altogether ﷺ. He not only held himself to that standard, but he was held by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to a different standard. And that standard is technically what we should aspire to hold ourselves to, even though it may be very difficult for us to do that, due to the many differences that exist between us and between him ﷺ in many ways. But nonetheless, the Quran still exerts a certain amount of time within its pages and within its teachings to focus on what is expected of us. What does it mean to be Muslim? What type of behaviors should we be adhering to? What is not acceptable to occur from us? And we get to see that within the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many places. And this is probably, these verses that we have here probably are probably not even the most full with that. Other parts of the Quran have way more commentary on this topic specifically. But I chose it because I thought for the 27th night, this may be a good point to make. When religiosity is not accompanied with ethicality, we run into problems. When religiosity, meaning your focus on reward and punishment and rituals, when that piece occurs in your life and it is not accompanied, it is not affiliated with ethicality, meaning you're holding yourself to a standard of ethics and principles and values and morals that are of high degree and high level, then we run into real problems. And this ends up becoming this ends up becoming the story for a lot of ideologies over time. Over time, the ethical piece, the principle-driven piece kind of slushes off. That you're stuck with not even the full rituals, but maybe a shell of the rituals. And it's a very weird thing to observe. People who get very uptight and upset over aspects of rituals, just very detailed aspects of rituals, while they are eating haram, or beating their loved ones, or abusing people, or lying through their teeth at every chance to make a living, or corrupt. It's very awkward to see stuff like that. And when you see it, honestly, it repels you from being religious, and it makes you less likely to want to commit to the teachings that the religion actually carries within it. And this is for sure a struggle that every religion has, and we are not exempted from that, unfortunately. We have it in our ranks as well. Which is why when you focus on the 27th night and you care for this night and you care for the barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon people within this night, and you're looking forward to His compassion and mercy and His forgiveness subhanahu wa ta'ala and His love and His connection, and you're asking for freedom of punishment and you're asking for commitment to be amongst those of Ahlul Jannah, all of these beautiful things, all of these things that we aspire to, that we want, you have to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equipped with some degree of ethicality. Like, you have to have some degree of morality that comes in with Yani, with this approach. If you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and all you have is this ritual-driven understanding, this very ritual-driven understanding, and there's no ethicality attached, the Prophet ﷺ tells us this hadith, and I'm going to start with this before I go through the verses. Yani, the Prophet ﷺ talked to us in the hadith al-sahih about a man, yani, ash'ath, aghbar, yani, a person who is yani, tired and humbled by travel. He looks yani, disheveled and yunadi, ya Rab, ya Rab. He's standing there and he's very, he has all of the apparent parts of getting his dua accepted. And the inner parts also. Like he is focused on his dua, he is calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has no shirk within what he's doing. He's achieved a degree of ikhlas in his heart. He looks humble on the outside, he's humble on the inside. He's calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a moment of beautiful connection. It's a moment of istijaba usually. And usually there's a moment of acceptance of dua, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the dua of the person who is doing this. And then alayhi salatu wasalam adds to this, to this story. He would say, وَمَطْعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَلْبَسُهُ حَرَامٌ وَغُذِّيَ بِالْحَرَامِ فَأَنَّى يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. But he eats haram, and he drinks haram, and he dresses haram, and he was fed all his life haram. How is he going to be responded to? And how does he expect he's going to find a response from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Even though everything else fits. Even though everything else fits, this man is doing everything right. All the stuff that we're trying to teach during the tazkiyah sessions, for example. All of that, he got it all. He is humble at heart. He is compassionate. He is someone who's achieved a certain degree of sincerity. His appearance has that as well. He's turning upon his Lord and he is not associating anything with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of the check boxes, but there's one checkbox that he didn't get. He didn't get that ethical piece. He came to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala limping with lack of ethicality, with no code of conduct. He engaged in haram. And that annuls the whole effort. That annuls the whole effort. This is what I want you to be afraid of tonight. And tomorrow night. And the night after. And every other night until you meet God subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be afraid of that. Be afraid of coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a heart that is filled with khushu' and sincerity. And a humble, but there's an aspect of your conduct. There's an aspect of your conduct that is not, you don't care about people's harm. You're not sensitive to their needs. You are rude or disrespectful. Someone is being arrogant towards others. Someone is taking something that is not theirs. They're abusing others, or they're eating haram, or be careful. Be careful. These behaviors, tuhbitul amal, they can take away any hope of deeds being accepted. And they can take away the barakah of you making dua. You can sit there and talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all you like. All you like. Call upon Him with tears running down your face, dripping from your chin. But if in your real life, that's not who you are. In your real life, people complain of the oppression that you practice upon them, of the mistreatment. If you don't care about where your mal comes from, and if you're not watching how you deal with those around you, and if you're not holding yourself to an ethical standard and this must be, in my opinion, the most scary thing for a Muslim in his life, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens all these doors, all the doors of spirituality for you, but you slam them shut with your lack of ethics. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens the door of His dua for me, opens it up as wide as can be, the winds of His mercy blowing in my face, and I slam it shut because of the lack of my ethics, because I'm a zalim, because I oppress my wife, or I mistreat my children, or I'm not good towards my siblings, or I'm not bar toward my parents, or I'm taking haram, or I'm lying in business, or I'm mistreating my employees, or I'm cheating on my exams, or I'm cheating at work, or I'm lying to everyone and I'm not trustworthy. And all of this effort that we're putting in, all of these nights of Ya Rab, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, all of these moments of spirituality, of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala add up to nothing. He said this, alayhi salatu wasalam. Wallah, had he not said it, I couldn't say it myself. Wallah, I wouldn't be able to say it. Like I wouldn't be able to have the guts to say it. Someone would have shut me up. But he said it, alayhi salatu wasalam, so he allows me to elaborate on it. وَمَطْعَمُهُ حَرَامٌ وَمَشْرَبُهُ حَرَامٌ فَأَنَّى يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. How is this person going to be accepted? How is their dua going to be accepted? So be careful and think about this. especially during this night. And when you think about it, the reason that we can't say with certainty that this is the night comes from an incident similar to it. Like, to a certain degree, there's similarity. When he explained alayhi salatu wasalam what happened, now Jibreel could have come back at any point within his life and told him exactly what night it was, but he didn't, because there's a lesson here to be learned. He wants us to work for the 10 nights, and then knowing that one of them is going to be it for sure. You're guaranteed one of them, so you work for 10. But when he came out, فقال ألا إن جبريل كان قد أخبرني بها وإنني نسيتها. Indeed, I was told the exact night by Jibreel, and then I was made to forget it. فقالوا يا رسول الله وما أنساك. And what made you forget? فقال تلاحى فلان وفلان. There are two people who were fighting with each other during Siyam. They were fasting and they were raising their voices towards one another, using obscenities and fighting. So the Prophet ﷺ had to go and intervene and stop and calm them down and stop this bad behavior, these bad ethics in the midst of the days of Ramadan. And as he was doing that, he forgot the number. The number just slipped out of his head. He couldn't remember the number. He's like, I know it's an odd number at the last 10 nights, but I can't remember which one it is. Now, again, Jibreel could have come back later. He has time. He could have come back and told him. But he didn't. So that this story would be what we would base it all on. That the reason that the Prophet ﷺ forgot the night is because of people's bad behaviors. Meaning that not only could you forget one of the reasons that you don't get accepted during the Laylatul Qadr is these bad behaviors. Is mushajara wa talahi wa mukhasama. When people fight and dispute amongst each other, when they ruin their relationships, when they dispute over things they shouldn't dispute over. So watch out. Shahna, brothers and sisters, shahna is one of the reasons that you lose your, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's many narrations from the Prophet ﷺ, from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, where they point out there are many blessed nights throughout the year, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive everyone, illa mushrik aw mushahin, except someone who associates one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one who has filled their hearts with hatred towards his fellow human being. Tonight, and for the next 2 nights, you must cleanse your heart from hatred. You must cleanse your heart from animosity, from envy, from grudges. You must fill your heart with forgiveness and with pardoning of others and with compassion. You have to do this tonight. And if you think or believe or see or have a reason to believe that someone in this world feels that way towards you because of something that you've done to them, then reach out and try to end that. Reach out and offer whatever you need to offer, whether it's an apology or whether it's a commitment, or try to remove from their hearts any degree of mushahana towards you, so that you're not a zalim, so that you don't let the possibility of being someone who's mistreated someone else actually exist. And this is my advice to you, within these nights. The first ayah that we're going to go over, that we'll hear in the first set of 4 rak'at tonight, exists at the end of surat Al-Mumtahinah, where the Prophet ﷺ is told the following: Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, إذا جاءك المؤمنات يبايعنك على ألا يشركن بالله شيئا ولا يسرقن ولا يزنين ولا يقتلن أولادهن ولا يأتين ببهتان يفترينه بين أيديهن وأرجلهن ولا يعصينك في معروف فبايعهن واستغفر لهن الله إن الله غفور رحيم. So the Prophet ﷺ is told to accept the bay'ah of the mu'minat, of the women believers who came to Medina alone. This was a phenomenon that occurred during his time, ﷺ, where ladies would break loose from their oppressive husbands or the oppression of Quraysh, and they would come as believers to Medina. And the agreement that he would send everyone back, if they didn't have permission. That was the agreement of Hudaybiyah. If anyone came with no permission to Medina, he would send them back, ﷺ. But he refused to do it for women. He refused to do it for the ladies. He said, no, I'm not sending them back. And whatever financial dues need to be paid, we'll pay them. There's a whole verses before this explain. Because he can't send them back because they're going to be oppressed and they won't be able to stand up for themselves and they won't be protected, so he kept them. He said, nope, they stay here. But he was told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to make sure that they are honest, that they're truthful, that they're not coming as spies. They're not coming saying that they're believers, knowing that you're not going to send them back, pick up all the information and then make their way back to the camp of Quraysh. So he had to establish some way to make, this is why the surah is called Mumtahinah. You have to test them, see. يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا جَاءَكُمُ الْمُؤْمِنَاتُ مُهَاجِرَاتٍ فَامْتَحِنُوهُنْ. So make sure, establish that they are honest. And if they are truthful and honest, then do not send them back. فَلَا تَرْجِعُهُنَّ إِلَى الْكُفَّارِ. Don't send them back. So what would he do for them, alayhi salatu wasalam? He would offer them a bay'ah, a specific bay'ah to them, alayhi salatu wasalam. This bay'ah is not necessarily specific to them, it's the same, but we get the wording of it in this ayah. Like we get the actual wording of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is performing the bay'ah with them, what the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is performing the bay'ah with them upon. Which ended up being the same words, or was the same wording of Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Ula. So the wording that exists here is the same wording that existed in the first Bay'at al-Aqaba. When the Prophet ﷺ, after the first year, the 10th year of Hajj, he met the 6 guides from Mecca, from Khazraj, from Medina, and he told them, go, bring me back people from the other tribes, and then come back. 12 people came back the next year. 4 of them were from Al-Aus and 8 from Al-Khazraj, so he had a reasonable breakdown. So he performed with them Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Ula. There was a pledge that he gave. And then, of course, there was Bay'at al-Aqaba al-Thaniya, which is a different pledge, and I think I spent maybe 10 or more khutbahs kind of going through all of the elements of that bay'ah. But the first bay'at al-aqaba was simple. It was an ethical bay'ah. It was an ethical bay'ah. The second bay'at al-aqaba was not ethical. It was actually commitment driven. It was driven based on your commitment to him, alayhi salatu wasalam, and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a whole, yani as a holistic way of looking at the deen. But the first bay'at al-aqaba was ethical, and the bay'ah that he performed with these ladies who came was also ethical. So what was it that they had to pledge? أَلَّا يُشْرِكْنَ بِاللَّهِ شَيْئًا. That they will not associate ever again anyone else with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's tawheed. And tawheed is always the cornerstone. Everything in Islam is always going to be based in tawheed. It's going to be embedded in the concept of La ilaha illallah. Everything. Everything is second or third or fourth or whatever number you want to the shahadat al-tawheed of La ilaha illallah. It's always been the case. It's always be the case. This is what protects our deen. This is what protects us as Muslims, and we have to stand guard in front of La ilaha illallah, protecting the concept of tawheed that we understand is the reason that our deen is the way that it is and it functions the way that it functions. وَلَا يَسْرِقْنَ, and that they would not steal. وَلَا يَزْنِينَ, that they would not perform adultery. وَلَا يَقْتُلْنَ أَوْلَادَهُنَّ, they would not harm their children. They would not ditch their children or abuse their children. And qatl here is not necessarily murdering their children, but anything that is similar to that, yani whether it's spiritual or financial. ولا يقتلن أولادهن ولا يأتين ببهتان يفترينه بين أيديهن وأرجلهن, and that they will not make up lies, meaning they will not lie, and they will not give false testimony, and they will not spread rumors. ولا يعصينك في معروف, and that they will never disobey you whenever you give them a command of ma'ruf. I mean, whenever you give a command of something that is good, that is helpful. This is very interesting. In the Quran you find this a couple of times. طاعة بالمعروف. You are not required to obey a person, a human being, if they are commanding you to do something that's harmful to yourself or harmful to others. You're never required to do that. You're only required to obey in situations where you're being commanded to do something that is beneficial, that's ma'ruf, that is ethical, that has benefit attached to it to yourself and to people around you. You're not required to ta'a bil munkar. It's only ta'a bil ma'ruf, only. Whether we're talking about spouses in matrimony, or we're talking about a leader and a congregation, we're talking about a political leader and his people. It's ta'a bil ma'ruf. We don't obey when someone is commanding us to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to do something that's harmful. If someone is telling you to break the law or to harm another person, even if they're your superior, you don't listen. And if that means you get harmed because of that, then you get harmed because of that, and you deal with that. But you don't justify, well, I was just a soldier. No. You were commanded to do something that was unethical, and you knew it was unethical. You don't do it. You don't do it. Stand your ground. In medicine, we have to be taught this like time and time again. It's a very important part of the healthcare system. Is that I can't do anything unethical. And even if my supervisor or the person who can literally ruin my career with a stroke of his pen or an email that he sends, if he asks me to do something unethical, I can't do it. And if I do perform something unethical, because I was told by a supervisor or superior, then I am going to be held accountable in the court of law equally to him. Yeah, subhanAllah, that's how it happens Yawm al-Qiyamah as well. When you obey a command that is unethical, ta'a bil munkar, something that's not ma'ruf, you're accountable for that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, وَلَا يَعْصِينَكَ فِي مَعْرُوفٍ, and they obey you only when it's ma'ruf. Not that the Prophet ﷺ ever did anything else, but that was the teaching here. So that it's conceptual for them. It's not just based on that one example. It's conceptual. You follow when you're being given ma'ruf, and someone's telling you this is beneficial, do it. You don't say no. You go ahead with whatever's ma'ruf. These were the 6 elements of this bay'ah. All of them ethical. Not one part of this bay'ah has salah or siyam or zakah or hajj in it. Not one of it has qira'at Quran or dhikr or tasbih or siyam or Ramadan, anything. It's just ethical. With tawheed, which is ethical. Tawheed is ethical, but I don't have time to actually explain it. But tawheed in essence is an ethical decision. You don't steal, and you don't commit adultery, and you don't commit harm to the people whom you're responsible for. And you don't lie, make up rumors, or spread misinformation. And you don't refuse any form of encouragement or commands that are beneficial. And this is the code of conduct that we carry as Muslims. This is how we live. This is what represents, you're supposed to represent this, and I'm supposed to represent this. And this is what represents us. This bay'ah that the Prophet ﷺ performed with these new sahabiyat, the same bay'ah he performed with the early Muslims when he decided to come to Medina, or he was moving towards coming. He needed that these 12 people adhere to this. Because without this ethicality, if a Muslim if you're standing here with your hands up, Ya Rab, wa yasriq. He's stealing, taking mal haram. Ya Rab, wa yazni. Committing this sin ongoingly. Ya Rab, yaqtul waladah. Yu'dhi jarah. Yakdhib ala nas. So he bears false testimony, harms his neighbor, abuses his family members. Ya Rab, Ya Rab. Doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. May Allah forgive us, wallahi, and protect us. But this is the code of conduct. This has to be solid. This has to be solid first. In order for your religiosity and your spirituality to benefit you, to give you something, you have to have those ethics. The second story that I'm going to share with you, that we'll hear in the second set of 4 rak'at, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us a very interesting incident that happened with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and his wives. وَإِذْ أَسَرَّ النَّبِيُّ إِلَى بَعْضِ أَزْوَاجِهِ حَدِيثًا فَلَمَّا نَبَّأَتْ بِهِ وأظهره الله عليه عرف بعضه وأعرض عن بعض فلما نبأها به قالت من أنبأك هذا قال نبأني العليم الخبير. So here's what happened. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام would stop by one of his wife's house one day and have asal. She had like a certain type of honey. And he would stop by and chat a little bit. So Hafsa and Aisha didn't like that. So they decided amongst each other that they would tell him that you have bad breath. He didn't like that, alayhi salatu wasalam. He cared for these details. His hygiene on multiple levels, he cared for it. So he didn't like to carry bad breath for any reason. They didn't want him to keep on going to this other lady's home. So they told him, bad breath. Rihat maghafir. So and this is what basically they told him. So they told him this, alayhi salatu wasalam. And when they told him this, he said, "Khalas, I'll never eat it again. But don't tell anyone about this. But keep this between us. This whole story." إِذْ أَسَرَّ النَّبِيُّ إِلَى بَعْضِ أَزْوَاجِهِ حَدِيثًا. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam told a secret to one of his spouses. فَلَمَّا نَبَّأَتْ بِهِ وَأَظْهَرَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. But then she went and she did not keep that secret. She went and she told it to someone else, and it became known that this occurred, that the Prophet ﷺ was stopping here and taking some, and then he made yameen that he would not eat this asal anymore, which hurt the feelings of the wife who was offering him the honey. He didn't want that to happen, so he told, don't say, I just won't eat it anymore, but keep this between us. She didn't. And she spread that secret. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel, and Jibreel alayhi salam explained to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam all that happened. Not just the fact that his wife told his secret when he asked her not to, like he also told him, by the way, they conspired. Like there was no, your breath was fine. The asal had nothing in it. They just didn't want you to do this anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ now has the information of the whole incident. فَلَمَّا نَبَّأَتْ بِهِ وَأَظْهَرَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him about the whole story. أَظْهَرَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. What did he do, alayhi salatu wasalam? He stormed into the front drawer saying, I knew it. I knew it. I knew at the moment you said it, you were full of it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَحِقُّ الْحَقِّ يَحِقُّ الْحَقِّ. Only the right will prevail. You and her lying. عَرَّفَ بَعْضَهُ وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْضٍ. What he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, is he pointed out one part of the story to them. وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْضٍ. And he didn't point out the other part of the story to them. So he didn't come and tell them, by the way, I know you conspired. Ya ibishum. Shame on you for doing. He didn't say that at all, alayhi salatu wasalam. He came and he pointed out the piece of the story that mattered that they have to learn from, which is you shouldn't have told the secret that I left you with. Like I told you something in confidence, you should not have broken that seal. It's a seal that if I can't have that with you, then we're not going to go very far. Like if you can't trust me with your secrets, and I can't trust you with mine, meaning there's no confidence within this relationship, then this relationship is going to be problematic. So all he came and did, alayhi salatu, is point out that you let people know when I asked you specifically not to do that, and that's not okay. فلما نبأها به, when he told her that you broke the confidence and you shouldn't have done that, قالت من أنبأك هذا? How did you know? قال نبأني العليم الخبير. The one who told me is العليم الخبير, the omniscient and the one who knows that which exists outside the hearts. The interesting part of this story is that Aisha and Hafsa only found out that the Prophet ﷺ knew about this conspiracy when they heard these verses. It's when Jibreel brought these ayat to him ﷺ, and he's standing there in Isha praying, and Aisha and Hafsa are standing behind. They hear, Ya ayyuha an-nabiyyu lima tuharrimu ma ahalla Allahu laka tabtaghi mardata azwajika wallahu ghafurur rahim. And the verses go on to talk about what happened that day, and what they conspired to do, and what the Prophet ﷺ knew. So they knew in Salah, as they listened to him recite these verses, that he knew that they had conspired against him. Yeah? But he didn't say anything to them, alayhi salatu wasalam. That's the whole point of this wording. عَرَّفَ بَعْضَهُ. He explained some of that which he knew. وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْض. And he chose to ignore that which he didn't know. Because what's the point of that? What's the point of him storming into through the front door and saying, you conspired, you and her conspired, and getting upset? What was the point? What was that going to achieve in terms of their relationship? What was that going to do? It wasn't going to do anything. He was just going to be able to say, I was right. I knew it. Right? It's a very fulfilling moment, by the way. It's a short high. It's like a drug, right? It's a very powerful drug. The I told you so moment. I hold on to that for months, sometimes years. I have notes on my phone that Fulan, at some point in 2030, I will revise this again. If it happens as I said, I will tell him I told you so back, and I'll actually document it in my notes. I have notes from 2014 of things that I'm waiting to show someone 15 years later. I told him 15 years later, this is where you'll be if you don't listen to me. And he's not listening to me, and he's actually getting very close to that, and I can't wait to tell him I told you so. It's a very fulfilling moment, but it's very petty too. And it's not helpful. And it's self-fulfilling. It's not really helpful for the person in front of you. The Prophet ﷺ is not in need of any form of further self-fulfillment. He doesn't get anything out of saying, I told you so. It bothers him, actually. It bothers him to have to say, why did you do this? I told you. Now look. Now we have to clean up this mess together. Because for him, ﷺ, the mess of any one of his ummah was his mess. He had to help. So it was more work that he had to do anyways. So he found there was no pleasure in telling anyone, I told you. So he never did it, alayhi salatu wasalam, which is why وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْض is the point of this ayah there. Like, really, I could have told you the story and you would have enjoyed it, and I wouldn't have, without that piece of the verse, you wouldn't even know. But he pointed this out, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam specifically chose not to point out certain things to his wives, because there was no benefit in it for them. There would have been a benefit in it for him where he would feel better, because he was conspired against and lied to. And no one likes to be conspired against and lied to. But they wouldn't learn anything, because they did it out of a moment of jealousy and love for him, so he forgave that. But what he knew that needed to be pointed out is that you can't break confidence. And that's for them. That is a lesson that they will benefit from. Because the Prophet ﷺ wants to confide in them, and he continued to confide in them. Hafsa held on to the Quran. Aisha knew about all of the battles before they happened. He confided in them, alayhi salatu wasalam. So he needed to make sure that he could. Like, you can't do this again, ever. I'm going to entrust you with information. I need to know that you will hold on to that secret in confidence. You can't just go tell people. So it was about them. Like he came and he corrected the mistake, but based on what their needs were, not based on what his needs were. That's why عَرَّفَ بَعْضَهُ. He explained some of it. وَأَعْرَضَ عَنْ بَعْضٍ. He let other parts of it go. The part that most of us would be that would be the first thing to point out. I don't care about you told the secret. You conspired. I knew it. I'll never listen to you again. I'll never this, blah, blah, blah. But he didn't, alayhi salatu wasalam. And his wives would find out that this happened listening to Salat al-Isha one night when he was reciting these new verses. And that's why the verses continue to talk to them. إِن تَتُوبَا إِلَى اللَّهِ فَقَدْ صَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. If you perform tawbah appropriately, then your hearts will come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that means you've listened. وَإِن تَظَاهَرَا عَلَيْهِ. And if you continue to conspire against him, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ مولاه وجبريل وصالح المؤمنين والملائكة بعد ذلك ظهير. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stands by him, and the malaika stand by him, and the mu'mineen stand by him, and Jibreel stands by him. So don't conspire against him again. So they didn't. فاستغفر الله. Both Aisha and Hafsa استغفر Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they never heard a word from him alayhi salatu wasalam. He never said anything. He never held this against them. He never reminded them of it later. This is the code of conduct that he was held to alayhi salatu wasalam. This is how he behaved. It takes a certain degree of maturity. It takes a certain degree of inner strength and of self-fulfillment for you not to require that moment of pointing out when you're right and when someone else is wrong and letting it go. Make sure that before you get heavy into relationships that you've achieved a certain degree of maturity on that front so that you can live happily. If you don't, then you will not be very satisfied. Even if you're the one who's always right. No, especially if you're the one who's always right. Because when people get married, there's always going to be mistakes. If you have a need to always rub it in when you're right, then you will end up lonely and alone in your life. You will end up at the end alone and unloved and with very bad memories about you. Even though you're going to sit there and say, but I was right the whole time and they've been wrong the whole time, no one cares. Rarely in relationships does anyone care who is right and wrong. It has to be something like this, like the Prophet ﷺ picked up. No, confidence, we have to point this one out, because this will actually ruin our relationship. This will ruin our unit here if we don't have confidence in one another. So he pointed out what he needed to point out, alayhi salatu wasalam, that's going to affect their ability to function as a family. But then there's so many other things in life that don't require that. There's so many examples in your life where you can just let it go. You could easily just let it go. Don't let the need to prove that you were right ruin your relationship with the people that you love. إذا كنت في كل الأمور معاتبا صديقك لم تلق الذي لا تعاتبه. If every time a friend of yours makes a mistake and you need to point out his mistake for him, you will end up friendless. This is ancient wisdom. You'll end up with no friends. They will slowly grow away from you because it's not fun to be with people who continuously have problems that they need to point out, and you said that and you did this. Learn to kind of live beyond that. And the Prophet ﷺ, he rose above that in his house, in his family. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to make sure that we knew that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to make sure that you and I knew that's how he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. So these verses were revealed. Otherwise, the incident ended. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam heard from Jibreel what happened. He told Ayah and Hafsa, don't break confidence again. That's not appropriate. And that was the end of it. Khalas. He knew that they conspired. He never said anything about it. He went on with his life, alayhi salatu wasalam. Jibreel came back and said, no, there's more. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu lima tuharrim. And actually the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was told, by the way, you made a mistake. You should have never made something haram to yourself. Never say that. Even if, never do that. Don't make haram upon yourself something that Allah did not make haram upon you. Doing that for someone else actually makes you resent them. So don't do that. So it was a lesson for him, alayhi salatu wasalam, as well, and us. And I went through the tafsir of surat Al-Tahreem not too long ago in the Sunday tafsir in English. Go back and listen to it. Honestly, these verses require a good degree of contemplation and reflection. The final ayah that I want to share with you in the code of conduct, Quranic theme for tonight, exists at the end of Surah Al-Qalam, which is a surah that talks about our code of conduct or our ethical need, the ethical standard. Surah Al-Mulk, this last two juz are very, they're fun, and the surahs are absolutely beautiful. And Juz Tabarak is all about da'wah. It starts by talking about 4 basic needs. In order for you to represent Islam appropriately, you need 4 things. You have to have a certain amount of knowledge, which Surah Al-Mulk takes care of. You have to have a certain amount of ethics, which Surah Al-Qalam takes care of. You have to have a certain amount of emotional response to Islam, meaning a certain emotional investment, which Surah Al-Halaqas talks about. And you have to have a certain degree, a certain amount of behaviors. Certain actions have to be a part of your life in order. If these 4 things exist, then you'll be fine. And Surah Al-Qalam talks about the ethical code, which is why the beginning of the surah, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Indeed, you're upon someone who has that perfect character. But at the end of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I love this. I think I've done it every year. I think one of the ayahs that I've done every year. I just love this verse because it's so, people don't notice it, and it's very meaningful. What he says subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِن يَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ لَمَّا سَمِعُوا الذِّكْرَ وَيَقُولُونَ إِنَّهُ لَمَجْنُونَ وَمَا هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. When Quraysh and the people of Mecca who disbelieved in him alayhi salatu wasalam were frustrated with his narrative, with the power of his narrative, with the strength of the words that he was sharing, the thoughts and the ideas and the ethics. It was compelling. Islam was very compelling at the beginning, which is why they didn't want people to hear it, because it was just a superior argument by far. You couldn't hold a candle to it. And people, when they were getting exposed to it, they were, unless they had a personal reason, unless they had some personal grudge against the changes that Tawheed was bringing, they were embracing this pretty quickly. And it was frustrating for Quraysh, because Quraysh were losing people. They were losing the loyalty of certain individuals, and families were becoming were becoming weaker and weaker. That's amazing. It's amazing, wallah. Jazakumullah khair. The older brothers, everyone. MashaAllah. MashaAllah alayhum. May Allah preserve you. Yeah, out of all the years, this was the wrong year to do that. This is not a good year for Eid, I can tell you that much, yeah. Inshallah khair. May Allah bless you, inshallah preserve you. Alhamdulillah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Jazakumullah khair. So what he said, so what happened is that degree of frustration that they struggled with became so much that they started to just wish they had something on him. Like they wanted dirt. Forgive me for the use of this word. Quraysh wanted some dirt. They wanted something on him, alayhi salam. Something they can use, they can leverage in the argument with people saying, oh, don't listen to him, alayhi salam. Don't listen to Muhammad because he did this. They wanted something, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ajma'in. But they couldn't find anything. They would look and they would search and have people go back and look into his history and look into his relationships and talk to people, his friends and his business partners and his employers and employees and his relatives and his wives and his children and his uncles and his looking for dirt. They couldn't find anything. They had nothing. They couldn't make something up. They had to have something solid. They have to be able to say, well, Fulan said this or this happened. So all they could do is وَإِن يَكَادُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ. They are so envious of you. And they're so frustrated with you that they're staring you down. They're staring at you with their eyes, hoping that they can make you slip. لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ. Zalq is not a physical slip. Zalq is an ethical slip. All right, it's different. That's why the word لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ is very rarely used in the Arabic language. Very rarely used. Like if you go to tafsir, you'll find that the mufassirin, especially the early ones, they struggled with finding examples within Arabic poetry in Jahiliyyah where this word was used. But when they did find it, it was never ever used to describe a physical slip, but rather to describe a flaw, like a mistake, a kabwa. Meaning someone who's is held to a certain standard, and then they make a mistake. They make a mistake, and everyone, that's zalq. That person, he slipped up. He slipped up not as in, again, on a banana peel, but on a mistake or a thought or a decision that they made wrong. So the ayah is, it's very illustrative verse. You can almost see Abu Jahl and Al-Walid and standing there, just staring at him, alayhi salatu wasalam. It's just like, slip up. Come on, just make a mistake, just anything. And give us something to work with. لَيُزْلِقُونَكَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ. They're almost forcing you to slip up with their eyes, just staring at you with hatred. لَمَّا سَمِعُوا الذِّكْرَ. When they heard this reminder, this powerful reminder. وَيَقُولُونَ. And at the end, all they could say is, إِنَّهُ لَمَجْنُونَ. He's mad. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ajma'in. This is what they talked about. They couldn't say, see, madness is not an ethical mistake, right? Madness or insanity is not an ethical problem. I don't see this person to have low ethics because they lost their minds. No. Low ethics is someone who stole, who lied, who committed adultery, who spread a rumor, who took something that was not his. These are ethical problems. And they're sometimes very, even like ghiba and namima. Maybe even the use of obscenities. Right? The use of foul language. All of this you can call ethical problems. Nothing. You could find nothing on him, alayhi salatu wasalam. Do you know how much dirt they would find on any of us if they looked? Do you have any idea? Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Think about if someone really wanted to. Like if someone paid people to go after you, how much would they find on your past and in your life? May Allah preserve us and grant us sitr. Say Ameen. In dunya and akhirah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conceals us until the day of. But they did this for him, alayhi salatu. They went out looking for dirt and they couldn't find. All they could say is, innahu al-majnoon. Okay, he's someone who's lost his mind. That's not an ethical problem, but that's all they could do. We have a code of conduct in our deen, an ethical standard that you are held to, that I am held to. Make sure you know it well. And make sure when you come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your hands up, calling upon Him, and with all of the sincerity in your heart, that you observe that code of ethics. And if you're not, then you speak to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, asking Him to help you observe them. Asking Him subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow you to be better. Acknowledging to Him that I've made these mistakes. I have abused and I have mistreated and I have lied and I have done this and I've done that. I know I have done that and I regret them. Oh Allah, forgive me for that. And allow me to be a better person. Or else Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَنَّا يُسْتَجَابُ لَهُ. That's his wording, alayhi salatu wasalam. How is this person going to find anyone to respond to him? If he's eating haram and drinking haram and dressing haram, he's not going to be heard. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve us all. I'll end with that inshallah ta'ala. Subhanakallah bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.